2,000 years ago, one of Rome's most powerful men sat down and wrote a letter, not about politics, not about war. He wrote about time. His name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca, philosopher, playwright, and advisor to the Emperor Nero. And the first line of that letter has outlasted everything else he ever wrote. Asterisk omnia Lucillae aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Asterisk. Everything Lucilius is foreign to us. Time alone is ours. That sentence was written around 62 AD, and yet it describes something that has gotten measurably worse with every century that followed. Here is the uncomfortable reality. The average human being lives for approximately 79 years. That is roughly 692,000 hours total. After you subtract the hours spent sleeping, which will consume about a third of your life, you are left with around 460,000 waking hours. That is it. That is the entire budget. And according to current usage data, the average person today spends approximately 6.5 hours per day looking at screens. Project that across a full lifespan and over 20 years of your waking life will be spent in front of a display. Seneca's warning was not about screens, but it was about exactly this. He said, "You live as if you were destined to live forever. No thought of your frailty ever enters your head. Of how much time has already gone by you take no heed." This video is about what Seneca understood and what a German philosopher named Martin Heidegger, writing nearly 1,900 years later, proved in even sharper terms. Time is not something you have. It is something you are spending, right now, whether you choose to or not. And science has discovered exactly why your brain is designed to pretend otherwise. The Brevitate Vitae on the shortness of life was written around 49 AD and addressed to Seneca's friend and father-in-law, Pompeius Paulinus, who was deeply absorbed in the demands of public life. Seneca's central argument is not what most people expect. He does not say life is short. He says we make it short. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. This is a subtle but critical distinction. Seneca was not complaining about mortality. He was making a precise observation about human behavior, that people willingly surrender the one resource that cannot be recovered. He identified 3 categories of people who waste their time. First, the person consumed by ambition and public life, always chasing the next position, the next approval, the next achievement. They are productive by every external measure, but their busyness is borrowed. They are living according to other people's agendas. Second, the person devoted to pleasure, the one who drowns each day in comfort, entertainment, and distraction, and reaches old age confused about where the years went. Third, the person who delays, who is always preparing to live rather than living, who says when I retire, or when the children are older, or when things settle down, who permanently postpones the things that matter most in favor of the things that feel most urgent. Seneca's diagnosis was that most people do not possess their time at all. They merely occupy it. He made an observation that is startling in its specificity. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. Think about that. If a stranger reached into your wallet and took 20 euros, you would respond immediately. But if that same stranger took 2 hours of your attention through passive scrolling or meaningless distraction, most people would barely register the loss. Why? In 1927, Martin Heidegger published Sein und die Zeit, Being and Time, one of the most demanding and influential works of 20th century philosophy. Heidegger wanted to answer a question that sounds deceptively simple. What does it mean to exist? His conclusion was that most humans do not truly exist at all, not in any meaningful sense. They inhabit what he called das Man, the they-self, or the crowd. They do not live their own lives. They live a life borrowed from social norms, inherited expectations, and ambient cultural noise. They work jobs the crowd values. They pursue goals the crowd validates. They spend their time the way the crowd spends time. And the mechanism that makes this possible is the refusal to think clearly about death. Heidegger called this concept Sein zum Tod, being toward death. In everyday life, he observed, people treat death as an abstraction, something that happens eventually, something that happens to others. One dies, Heidegger wrote, meaning it is treated as something impersonal, something that applies to humans in general, but never feels immediately real to the individual. This distance from mortality allows people to drift, without a clear sense that time is running out their time. Specifically, irreversibly, there is no urgency to ask what they actually want from existence, or whether how they are spending today reflects that. Heidegger's remedy was not pessimistic. It was clarifying. He argued that when an individual genuinely confronts their own death, not as a distant philosophical idea, but as a personal, certain, and indefinite reality that could arrive at any point something shifts, the grip of Das Man loosens. The borrowed life becomes harder to sustain. The individual is thrown back onto themselves and forced to ask, what matters to me specifically? What am I doing with the time that is mine? He called this state Eigentlichkeit, authenticity, not authenticity in the shallow modern sense of expressing yourself. Authenticity in the original sense, reclaiming ownership of your existence. Both Seneca and Heidegger arrived at the same core insight from different directions. Wasted time is not an accident. It is the result of not taking your own finitude seriously. But if the problem is this old, and this clearly diagnosed, why do we still fail? Science has an answer that neither philosopher could have anticipated. In 2009, neuroscientist Hal Hirschfield at UCLA conducted a series of fMRI brain imaging studies to understand how people relate to their future selves. What he discovered was striking. When study participants thought about their current self, specific regions of the brain, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex, showed the activity patterns associated with self-referential processing. The brain recognized the self as the self, but when participants were asked to think about who they would be in 10 or 20 years, something unexpected happened. The neural activity shifted. Those same brain regions began responding in the pattern that the brain uses when thinking about a complete stranger. Neurologically, your future self is not you. Your brain processes your future self as someone else's problem. This has profound consequences. It is one of the primary drivers of temporal discounting, the documented human tendency to dramatically undervalue future rewards in favor of immediate ones. It explains why people chronically undersave for retirement, postpone health decisions, and choose the easier distraction now over the meaningful work that would matter later. You are not lazy. You are not undisciplined. Your brain is literally designed to deprioritize the future version of you. Hirschfield also showed that this gap can be bridged. When participants were shown digitally aged images of their own faces, forcing them to see and identify with who they would become, the neural response shifted back toward self-processing, and decision-making improved. The future self became real enough to be worth protecting. Now consider that alongside the procrastination research of Piers Steele, whose 2007 meta-analysis in the Psychological Bulletin, synthesizing data from hundreds of studies, found that between 80 and 95% of college students engage in procrastination, and approximately 15 to 20% of the general adult population are chronic procrastinators, defined as people whose delay causes genuine harm to their lives. And Steele found that this figure has been rising steadily, driven, in significant part, by an increase in available distractions. Seneca was right about the diagnosis. Heidegger was right about the mechanism. And neuroscience has confirmed why the problem is so persistent. Your own brain is working against you. So what do you actually do about it? The philosophical tradition and the scientific literature converge on three practical approaches. The first is memento mori, the Stoic practice of mortality awareness, not as a morbid exercise, but as a calibration tool. Seneca wrote directly, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing." This is not about becoming anxious about death. It is about using the awareness of finitude as a filter. When you are deciding how to spend an evening, or whether to keep postponing a conversation that matters, or whether to stay in a situation you know is wrong, the awareness that this is a real and limited life can cut through the noise that Heidegger's Das Man generates. The second practice is deliberate future self connection. Given Hirschfield's findings, this is not optional, it is corrective. The goal is to make the future version of you feel real enough that your present decisions account for that person. This can be done through writing, specifically writing a letter from your future self, describing what your life looks like in 10 years, what you are grateful for, and what would have been lost if your present self had continued on its current path. The neural mechanism Hirschfeld identified responds to vivid, personalized engagement with the future self. Abstract planning does not produce this effect. Concrete, narrative, first-person engagement does. The third practice is what Seneca called Otium, but what it actually means is structured depth. Seneca was not advocating idleness. He was advocating for time that is deliberately and consciously yours. Time spent in activities that you have genuinely chosen, that develop something real, and that you can account for without embarrassment. The opposite of odium is not work. The opposite of odium is distraction, disguised as rest. It is the 2 hours of passive consumption that leaves you neither recovered nor enriched. It is the perpetual low-grade busyness that Seneca identified as the occupational disease of the ambitious. Seneca ended his essay on time with a question that has no comfortable answer. He described watching people guard their money, their property, their reputations with vigilance and effort, while surrendering their hours to whoever or whatever requested them, without resistance. "Nothing is ours except time," he wrote. The question he was really asking was this: if time is the only thing that is truly yours, why are you the last thing you think about when deciding how to spend it? Heidegger's answer 2 millennia later was that most people will never ask that question until it is too late, because asking it requires acknowledging something the crowd has collectively agreed not to discuss. That every hour you spend is one you will not get back. That the future self your brain treats as a stranger is the person who will inherit every decision you make today. That the only moment you will ever actually have is this one. Seneca said it plainly: "You must not think a man has lived long because he has white hair and wrinkles. He has not lived long, just existed long." The difference between living and existing is not dramatic. It does not require a radical change or a crisis. It requires simply noticing that the clock is running and deciding to be the one who decides what it runs toward.